Hello and welcome. As India faces our greatest medical challenge, as people literally gasp for breath in several parts of the country, and as we try and ramp up vaccination to take on the threat of COVID, it's essential to look at where we stand through the prism of the World Health Organization, an opportunity for us to take a step back and speak to experts who have the interests of people across the world as the globe faces this unprecedented crisis. On this very special program, we are joined by two of the world's leading experts. Dr. Maria van Kerkhove, she's an infectious disease epidemiologist and the World Health Organization's technical lead on COVID-19, and Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, who is chief scientist at the World Health Organization. Dr. Swaminathan, let me come to you first, just as a general comment of what you are seeing on the oxygen crisis across large parts of India. Can the World Health Organization help in any way?
Thank you, Vishnu. Good to be with you. And our thoughts are with all the people in India who currently have loved ones who are suffering from COVID and who are in the hospital. We have seen this playing out in country after country when the health system gets overburdened due to the explosive growth in the number of cases. Ordinarily, the health system would be able to take care of the expected number of people, but it's the speed at which the infection has been increasing that's really placed the strain, including on the oxygen supply. So the WHO and partners, we have a consortium of partners who work, identified early on that oxygen needs in many, many countries across the world is far, far greater than the current global supply. And so this was flagged as an important issue, and there have been many efforts made. For example, we've been working with many countries to scale up the use of oxygen concentrators, including solar-powered oxygen concentrators. There are many aspects in the oxygen supply chain, starting with the production, but then more importantly is the transportation, the tankers that are needed, including cryogenic tankers. You need cylinders. You need also the supplies that are needed for patients to get oxygen safely, both at home and in the hospital. So we're working very closely with the government on this. Our logistics and supply chain experts through our WHO country office in New Delhi and the regional office have closely coordinated. We understand now that import duties have been waived on all equipments related to oxygen. And so over the next few hours and days, we will be working very closely indeed to try to alleviate the situation as soon as possible.
And Dr. Swaminathan, what specifically do you believe can be brought into India at this stage by way of helping, people literally gasping for breath? More concentrators, more tanks? What exactly are you looking at? And how soon?
So I think the government has made a list of items that it considers are in short supply. Some of them are obviously available in India. They need to be moved from one place to the other. The industrial supply, manufacturing of all other gases has been put on hold, and oxygen for industrial uses has been put on hold so that it's diverted for medical. But as I said, I think there is a need for tankers and possibly for concentrators that can be used in people's homes. Now, one thing I would like to say is that because of the fear and panic, there may be a tendency for people to purchase oxygen concentrators and keep them at home, just in case there is a need. I think as citizens, we all need to have some compassion and solidarity and empathy. We should not be hoarding supplies, whether it's drugs or whether it's oxygen, so that those who really need it can get it. And if everybody does that, then hopefully this situation of shortage should not last for too long. There's also the suggestion that we have a coordination mechanism at, it has to be at the sub-city level in cases of big cities, like at the ward level, where a nodal officer is appointed, both for the screening of people who may be at home. I think part of the thing is everybody's rushing into hospitals. So we need community level screening centers where patients can be triaged, their basic parameters can be measured and monitored, including oxygen saturation. Home-based monitoring for most people can be managed at home very safely. Less than 15% of people who have the infection actually need to go to hospital, and even fewer will need the oxygen. So I think by setting up a mechanism, perhaps a dashboard where people can also look at availability of beds in their particular region so that they know where they have to go, and a call center that's operating 24/7, that's guiding them as well as arranging ambulances. Right. I think a well-coordinated system would also help people get to the right place at the right time and avoid overcrowding in some places while others may have. And one more suggestion is to really have this graded level of management. So home management and isolation where possible. We know in India, a lot of people cannot isolate and be managed at home. So we do need these large isolation centers that we saw last year that were set up very quickly, where people could be isolated and get medical care. Then you need monitoring,
right,
and then you need the transportation to hospitals for those who really need it.
All right, so lots of important suggestions over there. Dr. Van Kerkhove, everybody wants to know about the variant or the strain or the mutant that, on the basis of clinical evidence, is causing a lot of harm in India right now. What does the WHO know about strains circulating in India?
So there are many viruses that are circulating, SARS-CoV-2 viruses that are circulating, and the more the virus spreads, the more opportunities the virus has to change. This is natural evolution. These mutations that are happening in the virus are expected. There are several virus variants that are circulating in India. Some of these are classified as variants of concern. This B117, which is a virus variant that was first detected in the United Kingdom, we know is circulating in parts of India. There's also the B617, which is a variant that has 2 mutations. This is a variant of interest that has been classified by India as a variant of interest, but also by WHO. What we are doing with scientists in India, there are incredible scientists across India. There is good genomic sequencing that is happening across the country. We would like to see that increased so that we know which viruses are circulating in which states. These mutations that have been identified in both the B617 and the B117 show that the virus can be more transmissible and it spreads more easily between people. These are the result of some of the mutations that have been identified in these variants. We also know for the B117 that there is some increased severity. But if you have increased transmission, you will have more cases. If you have more cases, you'll have more hospitalizations. And in a system, and in some parts of the country where the system is already overburdened, you will have more people that will require hospitalization, will require ICU, and will ultimately die because they will not be able to receive the care that they need. And so with this increased transmissibility, it makes control more challenging. But what I do want to say is that we know that with these virus variants, the public health and social measures, all of these actions that individuals can take in terms of physical distancing, and we know physical distancing in large parts of the country is very difficult, but distancing, the wearing of a well-fitted mask, making sure that you have medical masks for individuals who are of older age, above 60, and who have underlying conditions that fit above the nose and the mouth, that do not have the gaps in the sides and above and underneath, over the nose and mouth, well-fitting, 3-layer mask, fabric masks that have 3 layers. For others who are under 60, who don't have underlying conditions. Again, over the nose and mouth. Wearing a mask under your chin will not help. It needs to be over the nose and mouth. Clean hands when you're putting on and taking off those masks. Making sure that you have good ventilation. Spending as much time outdoors compared to indoors. Indoors is riskier than outdoors. Making sure that you practice respiratory etiquette and get the vaccine. There are many, many tools that we have at our disposal that work against these virus variants. The increase that you are seeing is deeply worrying. The intensity of transmission is not the same across the entire country, but you can turn this around, and you will turn this around. What we need is solidarity from everyone to do what they can to prevent themselves from getting infected in the first place. But if they do get infected, to isolate. And for those who need care, to use the hotlines that exist. And if those hotlines don't exist, to set those up so people know where they can get care. If they are not in an at-risk group, to be isolated at home and cared for at home. Isolated in a separate room if possible. If not, making sure that they stay away from other family members where their ventilation is good. Medical masks for those who are ill. Medical masks for those who are caring for those individuals. Check your oxygen saturation level using those pulse oximeters that can be purchased, and then knowing what to do if the oxygen level reduces, where to go to seek that help. But we need everybody's help right now, and we need the government to support people in carrying out all of these life-saving actions.
You know, you'd spoken about the increased transmissibility. Now, there's the UK strain and the so-called India double mutant strain. In terms of transmissibility, where are these strains on the basis of our understanding? How much more transmissible are they?
So they are more transmissibility because they have a mutation that allow the virus to adhere to the cell more easily and infect the human cell. When we say increased transmissibility, for example, what we talk about how many people an infected person will transmit to. What we know is the increase for the B117, this virus variant identified first in the United Kingdom. It has an increased transmissibility of about, it was before 1.1 up to 1.5, 1.7. So it is increasing, but it's not uncontrollable. And I think that's really, really critical that people don't feel that the white flag is raised and there's nothing we can do. There's still a lot that we can do. There are studies that are underway about the other variants as well.
1.6. I'm just trying to understand, is that 60% more transmissible, 70% more transmissible than the original strain, the most common one?
So it's between 40 and 50% more transmissible. Yes.
And the India one, how much more transmissible?
Scary, I think.
And the double mutant in India, how much more transmissible would that be?
So that is currently under study in terms of how much more transmissible. But the two mutations that have been identified suggest that there is that same type of increased binding to the cell. So we expect a similar level of increased transmissibility. We're not talking about, 100 times more or anything like that. What we're talking about is a slight increase. But any increase is not a good increase, especially when you have an overburdened system.
Right.
So that is what is currently being studied. And we're working with scientists around the world and in India to assess this.
Just a quick question on the importance of speedy genome sequencing in fighting variants of concern. And I ask that because, from what we know, last year, the speed of genome sequencing in India was painfully slow. This was actually, the double mutation was actually detected first in the month of October. And it was only towards late December, January, that there was this renewed effort through several institutions to try and speed up that process. And it appears that time was lost. So how important is speedy genome sequencing in large numbers as we tackle variants?
Sequencing is very important, but what we want is intelligent sequencing. Sequencing for sequencing's sake is not good. What we need is intelligent sequencing, good geographic representation. And as you have pointed out, sequencing capacities have increased. There's good sequencing capacity across India. We have seen that increase over the last several months, and that is continuing to increase. But what we also need is sequences plus epidemiologic information, clinical information, so that the analysis can be done. Scientists in India have been working with us and our virus evolution working group to assess these variants that have been detected, to understand what does it mean. Mutations happen all the time. Many of these mutations are not important. Some of them are. What we have is a global system in place to adequately study them, to find out which ones are important and why, because we want to ensure that our public health measures work and also our diagnostics, our therapeutics, and our vaccines work. The good news is that the virus variants are the vaccines, the diagnostics, the therapeutics still work against these virus variants, which is so important that people get vaccinated when they have the opportunity to get vaccinated.
We've got a lot of questions, so let's try and fit in a slightly shorter answers, both of you. And the fault is actually mine as well. But Dr. Swaminathan, the efficacy of existing vaccines on mutant strains, it gives us a sense of hope when we hear experts like you say that, look, it still works. So could you tell us in scientific terms, how well do they work?
Yes. So the good thing is that, within 4 months of starting vaccination programs across the world, starting in one country in December, we now have over 1 billion doses of vaccine administered around the world. And India has been one of the countries that has the highest rates. I think over 130 million people have received at least one dose. So this is fantastic, and it's going really well. Though, of course, globally, when we look at the distribution, there is a lot of inequity, but we can talk about that later. What we know now is that some of these variants that Maria was describing have mutations in the spike protein. The spike protein is the antigen, the region of the virus, which almost all of the first generation of vaccines had targeted. Because early in the stage when vaccine development started, scientists believed that spike protein would be the most important part, and they turned out it was correct. So the disadvantage there, of course, is that if you have mutations, does it affect the vaccine efficacy? Now, the good thing is that the spike protein contains a number of epitopes, and the mutations we are seeing is in a handful of them. So you talked about the strain where there are 2 mutations of concern, the 1617, but there are 15 mutations overall in that strain. But 2 of them are of concern because they affect the binding to the receptors. They also, because they affect the binding to the receptors, they may also affect the binding to the antibody, which is generated by the vaccine. Now, what do we know so far? The knowledge base here is constantly changing and emerging. So every day we get a new study or studies, and particularly I think we've just heard from Covaxin, the Bharat Biotech vaccine, that they've been looking at the Indian strain and it seems to work well. I think what we need to understand is that most of the vaccines that have been approved so far by regulators, when you take the full course, which is 2 doses usually for most vaccines, the amount of antibodies generated in the body is quite high. It's in fact higher than after natural infection. Mm-hmm. And that's usually enough to protect against the variant viruses as well. What it does do is it protects against the lower respiratory tract infection. So it protects you from getting pneumonia. It may not protect you from getting the infection. That's why we say continue to wear masks. You could still get the infection and carry it in your upper respiratory tract and spread it to others. But your immune system, both the antibodies and the cell-mediated immunity, which is elicited by the vaccines, is probably enough in the majority of cases to prevent hospitalization and mortality, which is what we really want to do. So we need to collect more data. India is already collecting data on breakthrough infections after vaccination, which is excellent. It's just in the range of 3 to 4 per 10,000 so far that has been observed. So that's very low. Among them, we need to see, are there people getting sick or are they mostly with mild infection? Right. And that will give us the real answer to your question. But I think at this point, I would like to reassure people that the state of knowledge suggests that vaccine will protect you from getting sick, and that you should take the vaccine, whatever vaccine is available to you. I was waiting for my turn here in Geneva, and because there's a prioritization by which the Swiss government was giving out the vaccines, and I just received my first dose last week. I did not know till I went to the center which vaccine it was going to be, but I was prepared to take anything that was offered.
Right. Dr. Van Kerkhove, the effectiveness of lockdowns in taking on the outbreak of a new strain of COVID, the goal, of course, is to break transmissibility. Hence, you unfortunately have to go into a lockdown. Nobody wants a lockdown. But isn't the timing of the lockdown equally important? It needs to be timed earlier rather than later. In a situation like we face in Delhi now, a lot of people would argue that it's come so late that the hospitals are overburdened. We all knew that there was a strain happening, and therefore, if a decision had to be taken, it should have been taken earlier. Would you agree with that?
It's never too late. The key right now is to break chains of transmission and to reduce the spread and to care for those who need clinical care. With the situation in India right now, with the large numbers of cases, the large numbers of hospitalizations, we want to reduce the number of people who will advance to severe disease and die. So getting those individuals into the clinical care pathway, ensuring that they receive the right care that they need now is absolutely paramount. But what also needs to happen is we need to reduce the spread. And in doing so, we break those social connections between people. We can remain socially connected, but physically distant. And these so-called lockdown measures are blunt force instruments that force people to not come together. And we do need to break those social connections right now because the virus is spreading out of control in some areas. What we need is to take control over over the spread and staying home as much as you can, being supported in staying home, not traveling right now. It's just not the time. There will be a time where we will get through this and where you will all get through this. But now is the time to come together and say, all right, what can I do? If I can stay home, I will stay home. We need governments to support individuals in doing so, working from home where possible, so that essential workers can go out and keep groceries in grocery stores so that people can be fed. It's about doing everything that is within our power to do so. So lockdown measures, or these so-called lockdown measures, our hope is that their use is targeted, it's tailored, it's geographically restricted to where they are needed most, and then it's for the shortest amount of time as possible, right. So that you take the heat out of the spread so that you can regain control over the systems, the healthcare systems,
Sure.
so that they can care for those most in need.
Dr. Swaminathan, India was known as the pharmacy of the world, but we are now in a situation where we could actually use a lot more vaccines because the pace of vaccine manufacture presently, and hopefully it will change in the next couple of weeks, but at the moment it appears to be fairly restricted. What about the impact at a global level, the impact of India's decision to stop the export of vaccines or their transfer to COVAX? So is that a huge concern internationally?
You know, the Gavi facility that distributes vaccines, childhood vaccines across the world, is to a large extent being dependent on Indian manufacturers. And this is, of course, a matter of pride that India was one of the major suppliers of both vaccines and generic drugs to large parts of the world, affordable and effective and safe products. Now, today, the situation is, the world produces about 5 billion vaccines a year. And now suddenly there's an additional demand of another 10 billion just to vaccinate the world against COVID. So no company is in the world has been able to ramp up this supplies at the speed at which it's needed. And so that is why we are facing, and we will face, I think, for the next couple of months, a shortage of supply versus what the demand is in India and in the rest of the world. I think our Director General talks often about vaccine equity. 1 in 4 people or 1 in 5 in high-income countries have received it, less than 1 in 100 in the lowest income countries, and even the health workers have not been protected there. I think the good thing in India is we have achieved a very high level of vaccination coverage for healthcare workers and frontline workers. At least they are protected compared to the last time. The temporary stopping of supplies to COVAX from the Serum Institute of India is definitely affecting the global supplies because of the dependence on SII vaccines. And therefore, we are now dependent entirely on one of the other manufacturers of the AZ Oxford vaccine based in South Korea to continue the supplies, but they don't have the kind of volumes and capacity that the Serum Institute has. Hopefully, as the other vaccines like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the Novavax vaccine, the Gamaleya, the Sputnik 5, as well as the Sinopharm and Sinovac vaccines from China, all of these are currently under consideration by WHO for the emergency use authorization, as well as for policy guidance from our policy-making body, SAGE. Again, a lot of manufacturing is going to happen in India for these vaccines as well. And it's really encouraging to see that the government has stepped up and is offering support to these manufacturers to put up additional facilities. We need to address issues like fill and finish. There are a number of facilities in India which may not be normally doing vaccines. They could be drug companies, for example, but which can offer up their factories for fill and finish. So the bulk can be transported there and fill and finish can be done, as well as exploring opportunities in other countries. As we are looking at, obviously the export bans that have been imposed by some countries on raw materials, that is affecting supply chains. And again, this needs a global solution. We're asking for donations from countries that have got more than enough supplies for their population, and those that have already started covering over 20% of their population, for them to spare doses for COVAX so that we can continue to send supplies to the rest of the world. A large number of countries are completely dependent on COVAX. They have no other means of supply. And then finally, we're looking at tech transfer and expanding the production. But that's more of a medium to longer term solution.
Yeah. Just a quick question on the promise shown by anti-COVID drugs such as Viralfin, which was it's a Zydus drug. It was cleared in India yesterday for emergency use authorization. We keep talking about vaccines, but antiviral drugs so very important. Is this promising? Is this, where does the WHO stand on drugs like this?
So as you know, we've been monitoring the clinical trials for drugs and updating our guidance from time to time. This is in addition to the Solidarity clinical trial that did look at interferon beta-1, which is this drug that's just been given EUA in India. The Solidarity trial looked at subcutaneous and intravenous interferon and did not find any impact on mortality. But the Solidarity trial and other trials that have been done have focused only on hospitalized patients with moderate to severe illness. Now, interferon could act, particularly there have been some early, very encouraging reports of nasal inhaled interferon, which could act
Yes.
if given very early in the course. So what we need is more research, more data. While it's being used as emergency use, I hope that clinical trials can be run looking at inhaled steroids like budesonide, looking at inhaled interferon, and also at inhaled nitric oxide. I think these are the drugs which can act early in the course and perhaps prevent deterioration. But as of now, there isn't enough evidence on interferon to recommend it routinely.
That's interesting. I'd like to thank both of you very much for joining us, and it's great to see the WHO working as closely as it is with India to deal with the present situation of oxygen shortage. It's a real crisis across India, and I think speed is of the essence to find immediate solutions. I'd like to thank both of you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.